It's on.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Bom dia. Bonjour. Buenos dias. Good afternoon, or even good night. We don't know. So if we have people watching us from different parts of the world, probably. But here we are for one more session of our Meet the Author from our ILF Brazil group. And today we have the pleasure of having with us a great friend, colleague, and scholar directly from my beloved Lisbon, Luis Guerra. And I'm going to introduce him a little bit to us. And then after this, he's going to give us a short talk on the text that he sent us to read. And after the talk, we open to questions with the group and later with the public on the channel. So Luis is Brazilian and has been living in Portugal for many years. And I asked him if he wanted to have this discussion in English or in Portuguese or in Spanish or in Turkish or in any other language, but then he said he preferred in English because his material and also the jargon he's more used to concerning ELF is basically in English. So then, but of course, he can take questions in Portuguese later if you want. So, all right. So Professor Guerra is assistant professor at the University of Évora in Portugal, and he works in the Department of Linguistics and Literature. He has a letras degree from Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro. His degree is in Portuguese and English. Then he has an MA in TESOL from Hunter College from Central University of New York. And his PhD was taken in at the University of Warwick, UK. And Luis is also the director of the Language Center of the Language Center of the University of Évora. I think from what I could understand when I was there, it has some similarities to our NUPEL. And also he participates in different groups, research groups in Europe, especially the one, the Erasmus or the project ILTERG, which is International Language Teacher Education Research Group with colleagues from different parts in Europe, Turkey, Greece. Nikos is also the one of the members of the group, so of the project. So then also Luis has published extensively articles and chapters in books, and has organized and edited volumes, and also including with us. So then it's a pleasure to have him here with us. And with great pleasure, we welcome you, Luis, here. And I'm sure we're going to have a great time this morning. So thanks a lot. Muitíssimo obrigado for being with us.
All right.
And let's have fun.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Savio, for this introduction. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, the whole group. I think we've been trying to make this possible, right, Savio? This exchange between Portugal and Brazil, Bahia and Évora and Lisbon, and things are not that easy to make possible. But anyway, I think this one is a real good chance, a good opportunity for us to start this relationship between our institutions. So I thank you for the invitation. I thank the ILF group for participating, for taking your time to be here and to read my article and discuss with me and enrich the article itself and the whole research on ELF. So before I start with the presentation, I just wanted to acknowledge and thank my co-authors, Lili Cavalheiro, Ricardo Pereira, Yavuz Kurt, Elifchan Ostekin, Echehan Sonmes Kandam, and Yasmin Bayurt. These are the members, or some of the members of the project that Savio mentioned a while ago, the Erasmus Plus Project ILTERG, International Language Teacher Education Research Group. And this study, which gave rise to this article, which is going to be published in Ralph Journal soon. So this article, this study was the result of a cooperation between the University of Évora, together with collaborators from the University of Lisbon and the Polytechnic Institute of Leiria, and the Boğaziçi University in Turkey. So I also need to acknowledge that this project and this study was funded by the Turkish National Agency. So as Savio said, I'm going to introduce some aspects, some important and relevant concepts that we included, or that we considered for our article in a brief presentation. But then I will also expand and refer to supplementary issues which I believe are of crucial importance to our understanding of ELF. And as he said, this is going to be in English. The article was published in English, so the whole the study and everything was done in English. But of course, I'm more than happy to engage in a discussion in Portuguese with whoever wants to use Portuguese. So it's not a problem at all. It's just that I wanted to start everything with English. So from now on, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Let's hope I remember how we did this yesterday in our rehearsal. So I'm going to share the screen with the some information about the article, as I said, and then we'll go back to our discussion. So I believe the screen is over there. I just want to.
Yes, it's
Okay.
here. Mm-hmm.
It's there. Oops.
Yeah.
So you can see the first slide.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I think I thought that we should start by examining some definitions of ELF. There are many definitions of ELF, and the way that we deal with each one of them will somehow influence the way that we look at ELF. And in this first definition that you see there by House, that she proposed in 1999, she says that ELF, the definition that she proposes is based on the interactions among users of English. So you can see that she defines ELF in terms of ELF interactions, defined as interactions between members of two or more lingua cultures in English, for none of whom English is the mother tongue. And you can see that I highlighted that expression, for none of whom English is the mother tongue. Now, as to counteract with this definition, I suggest a second one by Jenkins, where she focuses on the use of English as a contact language, but she provides a different perception of the users involved in ELF interactions. And she says that English as a lingua franca refers, in a nutshell, to the world's most extensive contemporary use of English. In essence, English when it's used as a contact language between people from different first languages. And then she ends with including native speakers, native English speakers. And then I highlighted that as well to call your attention to the fact that depending on how you understand ELF, your definition or the way that you look at it is going to be slightly different. Now, looking at these two definitions, it might provide us with, some ideas in how we ourselves individually are going to perceive ELF. Now, I'm going to provide another one, just another definition of ELF. This time, a more recent one provided by Moranen in 2018, in which the notion of English being a contact language is once more highlighted. And let's look at it. Let's read this definition. The significance of ELF transcends the contact of any particular individual or group with English. ELF is not just a contact language or English is a domestic language or otherwise especially salient in a given community, but a non-local lingua franca. And I highlighted that. The means of communicating between people from anywhere in the world. Neither is its global weight restricted to elite usages in politics, international businesses, or academia, but it's also employed by tourists, migrant workers, asylum seekers, and just anyone in their daily lives over digital media. I mean, this is a long definition, and I picked this one not because it is long, but because by being long, it includes, it makes references to different aspects that can be related to or should be related to how we look at ELF. So, as you can see, similar to Jenkins's definition, both native and non-native speakers are included. But because ELF can take a place with whomever and wherever, Moranen describes it as a non-local lingua franca that can be used by anyone, anywhere for a given purpose. Now, if you notice, she also refers to ELF used not only in the established domains like the ones that are usually referred to, such as politics, business, academia, and tourism, as she refers, but also she makes reference to migrant workers and asylum seekers who use English as the common language of communication to interact with each other as well as locals. So, of course, this is a more updated definition of ELF, which attempts to incorporate the recent, let's say, developments of what ELF might entail. Now, and there's something interesting in this definition as well that she includes, which is reference to the digital media, and most of us. Come across English online on a daily basis through social media, YouTube videos, just like what we're doing now, gaming, among other areas. So I think this is a very thorough and it's an interesting definition of ELF that we should think of. And basically, I would highlight two key ideas from this definition that ELF occurs in formal educational settings as well as informal out of school contexts. And this is something that the out of school context seems to be somehow disregarded or disconnected to our practices as English language educators. And this is something that I wanted to highlight, that ELF is as much occurs as much in educational settings as in out of school settings. And the only aspect that I wanted to highlight from this definition is the multilingual or multicultural nature of English language use today, right? Now, keeping that in mind and moving on, I believe that in any attempt to define ELF, and then by defining ELF, I'm proposing our individual definition of ELF. So we should try to answer these three questions. Who is an ELF speaker, or who uses English as a lingua franca? And my choice of this question by who, in trying to identify who is involved in English as a lingua franca, stems from those two definitions that we saw before a while ago, in which one included and the other did not include the native speaker. We may later on talk about that, the role of the native speaker in ELF interactions. Now, another question that I think should be asked in our attempt to define ELF is, when are you an ELF speaker Or when do you use English as a lingua franca? And finally, another question that I believe should be asked is, how are you an ELF speaker? Or how do you use English as a lingua franca? Of course, I'm not going to propose a new definition. There are several definitions at our disposal. I just wanted you to think about how you yourself would define ELF based on your experience of as an ELF speaker. Now, I also believe that in order to fully understand ELF, we must consider other paradigms, such as world Englishes and English as an international language, as they are really closely related to each other. I'm making this point here because, I mean, if you remember, the whole study that we conducted, the article that you read, is based on that. There's no a single paradigm construct of ELF. ELF goes hand in hand with World Englishes and English as an international language. Why World English? Is because the World Englishes paradigm acknowledges a pluricentric view of English in which all varieties are given equal respect and should be recognized as valid. And also I believe that EIL is part of this larger construct in the sense that English is not linked to a particular social or cultural context. So it is, or at least it should be, culturally neutral, but of course, at the same time, paying attention to the development of strategic intercultural competence. Now, the way that I end this screen here with the expression intercultural competence leads us to the next idea that is relevant, that is extremely relevant to the ELF construct, which is the inseparability of language and culture when it comes to language teaching, which I believe is what we have in common here, right? So if we consider this such inseparability of language and culture in language teaching, I think it is crucial to understand the concept of intercultural communicative competence. If we want to approach ELF nowadays, we have to consider also a definition or an understanding of intercultural communicative competence. So, in 1997, Byram simply put it simply and stated that ICC is the ability to interact with people from another country and culture in a foreign language. Okay, so for him, someone who has acquired ICC is already able to build relationships while using the foreign language. And you see, I'm not using English here, I'm using this foreign language in general. Effectively communicating in that language and considering his or hers and the other's needs and points of view, right? Now, a few years before that, in 1994, Byram and Morgan recommended a three-dimension model to measure ICC in foreign language education. And the three dimensions that they proposed had to do with the knowledge dimension, the attitudes dimension, and the behavior dimension. And this is where I think the contribution of ICC is enormous for our context as language educators. If we consider the knowledge dimension, Byron and Morgan, they suggest that in order to communicate interculturally successfully, the learners must possess factual knowledge. And this is what we've been dealing with over the past years in terms of culture in language education, which is the knowledge, or at least the awareness of facts, of historical facts, of geographical facts, facts about societies, such as their ceremonies, their institutions, their holidays. This is what we usually find in our textbooks, right? But remember, we can never forget that this model was meant, or is meant, for foreign language learning, and we have to consider it in terms of what we want to do with this model, which is to apply it to English as a lingua franca, right? Now, the second element, the attitudes dimension, Byron and Morgan said that students need to develop positive attitudes towards language learning, as well as people from other countries. That's when I think that it gets really close to our perception of what an ELF paradigm should be like. And finally, the behavior dimension, which for them should not be restricted to, behaving politely towards others or following the etiquette when dealing with people from other countries. It's much more than that. It's behaving according to those sets of attitudes that you developed in terms of respecting the other, right? Respecting the other cultures. So, still in terms of culture and in language learning, I ask myself, or we can ask ourselves, how should we treat culture then under an ELF perspective? I believe these are the four basic approaches that we should consider. As I while ago I showed you the very briefly the features of ICC. I think that ICC, I'm reinforcing that idea, that ICC is crucial to understanding culture in ELF, in the sense that ICC refers to all cultures. It distinguishes, it draws no distinction between other cultures. Now, another aspect that I wanted to highlight is to think about the relevance of a specific native or non-native culture or cultures to the local context. So, thinking about, and as I said, as much as I wanted you to think about your own definition of ELF, I want you to think about your own understanding of ELF in your context. How relevant is a culture or a fact or some knowledge related to either a native, doesn't matter, native or non-native culture, is to your context? So how relevant is, just as in terms of an example, how relevant is studying or discussing Thanksgiving to your local context? Now, how relevant is one specific native or non-native culture? Is talking about, I don't know, it just crossed my mind when I thought about that, because of the relationship that is established between Brazil and the neighboring countries. Wouldn't it be worth talking about Argentina as another culture in your English language classes? Because it leads us to the next, also the next aspect that I believe should be regarded, which is the importance of the local culture, also including local culture in the ELF cultural perspective, which means locally engaging with native speakers and non-native speakers to express the local cultural values and facts. Maybe here I'm preaching to the choir, because from what I know, you guys have been doing, I mean, I said you guys, in Brazil, from what I know from your national policies and from the textbooks that I'm familiar with, and even by talking to to Savio and many other colleagues. I think this is one asset that you guys have clearly managed to incorporate, which is the importance of the local culture in the English classes, because I think it is as important for me to know about other native or non-native cultures as much as knowing about how to explain how you prepare an acarajé to a tourist, as much as we here have to explain how we prepare pastel de natas to a tourist in Portugal, and talk about the Portuguese culture, and talk about the cultures, the regional cultures in Lisbon and in Évora, in the Algarve. So it's quite important. And to finish that, one of those four basic approaches, in my opinion, to culture in ELF is how to deal with international topics rather than focusing on specific native or non-native cultures. And now I'm going to, stop sharing the screen because I want you to watch a video that I found, a while ago in YouTube, which is an interview with two authors of a series of textbooks by National Geographic Learning, and the series is called Life. So let me see. If I remember how to. Yep. Okay. All right. Okay. So I'm going to share a YouTube video.
You're doing great, Luis.
You see, I learned it from yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the video. It lasts about, I think, 3 minutes, 4 minutes tops. And so these two guys are talking about the role of culture in that textbook, in the Life series of textbooks by National Geographic Learning. Right?
So, John, culture obviously plays quite a big part in this course. Why do we teach culture in our language lessons? Why is it important?
Well, I think in the past we would have taught culture in terms of, if somebody had been learning English, they would have also learned about the culture of England or the US and so on. Now it's more complex because people are learning English, but they may never even come into contact with people from those countries. I also think because we've used a lot of texts about different parts of the world, that you can't avoid culture in the contexts of the text that you use. So, for example, in the elementary level, you've got a text about the Mini. Well, that Mini is that classic British icon, but it actually undermines that perception of the Mini because it's obviously now it's a German car, but also the text tells you, for example, that parts of the Mini come from all over the world. So the bonnet of the Mini is made in a factory in the Netherlands, but the company is Austrian and so on. And so this idea of local cultures and global cultures is particularly important, and I think, in the classroom.
So it still makes sense to talk about culture, but not necessarily in a purely British or American context.
Yeah, I think we have to think about it as much more a global topic and dealing with diversity and local versus global cultures and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's just a natural part of the language lesson almost, isn't it?
Yes. So how can we define culture for our students?
Well, I think you can talk about culture in different ways. You can talk about, for example, the products of culture, like with the example of the Mini. But then quite a lot of the time in the life books we deal with behaviour, values and attitudes and so on. So if you take an example from the intermediate book, you've got the topic of culture and colour, where the author deals with the topic of different colours in different cultures represent different things to different people and so on. But of course, culture also then is connected so much with language. So, for example, you can look at how, for example, culture relates to emoticons in text speak, and that we use different emoticons in Western Eastern Hemisphere
didn't know
countries
that.
to represent different things.
Yeah.
So the smiley that we use in Western Hemisphere countries is not the same as the smiley in Eastern Hemisphere countries, and so on. So it affects all sorts of things like products, behaviour, attitudes, values, and so on.
Okay, so it's very closely linked to language, in fact.
Yeah, you can't avoid it. Yeah.
So the teaching of cultural awareness is quite common in the language classroom. What approach do you think we should take to teaching cultural awareness in the class?
Well, I think one approach is to choose topics that relate to as many different countries and cultures as possible. So in life, I think we've dealt with over 60 different countries from virtually every continent in order to expose students to a wider range of cultures as possible. The other thing that we're involved in doing is challenging our students, sort of any stereotypes that people have about different cultures. There's one video in lesson I like in particular, which is about the city of Oxford, and most people have sort of certain stereotype images of what Oxford is like, and we completely turn that around in the video and we show a side of Oxford that lots of people perhaps aren't familiar with. But it's a great way of getting students to rethink their views on different cultures, and in that process you're getting the students to then reflect on their own cultures, and I think that's an important approach, that you present a culture to students and then they ask those same questions about their own culture as well, and that's an important part of what we do really when we teach culture in our language lessons.
Okay, I think we can have just cancel the YouTube, Luis, and then if you're going back to the presentation, I think, let's see. Yeah. So we have the slides back. Just unmute you, Luis, and then the slides are back.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, the slides are back. So just
Slides are back.
Yeah, unmute to you, and then it's fine.
I'm trying. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And the slides are back.
Now we have the YouTube screen is still there. The slides are in the back.
I have the slides here. Do you see the slides?
No, we still see the YouTube.
Yeah, I have to
screen.
get out of here. Yeah, I have to get out of the.
I can see the
I'm
slides
sorry about that.
in the background.
Yeah. So, but when I see that, you don't see the slides.
No, because that is the YouTube screen is still on.
Luis, maybe you should stop sharing your screen and then start again only from the slides.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That.
And now
How about
share,
now?
Now you share again.
Now share again.
Share again.
Yeah, the share again. Now we see you, but not the slides.
Okay. How about now?
No.
We still see YouTube.
Yes.
Now, yes. Just blow
Yes.
it up.
Okay.
Yes.
Just blow it up a little bit, and then we have it. Yes, great.
Okay. Oof. Oof. It took a while.
Now,
Sorry about that, guys.
it's part of the
Okay.
game. Don't worry.
Yeah. Okay. We want to do something different, and play with technology, and sometimes we end up doing something totally unpredictable.
No, but this is
Okay.
great. It's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, very briefly now, just based on what we watched with the video, my question is how then we critically approach the a materials analysis under an ELF perspective, because I'm getting closer to the whole aim of the article, right, of the study that we conducted. So currently there are two established ways to represent culture and language in ELT textbooks. First, a definitely native-oriented representation, which deals with, American language and American culture, British language and British culture, or both at the same time, and or not, including other native varieties or cultures. And I think uh, um, a second perspective would be this global perspective, which is concerned with a more international outlook on culture, which is a lot in tune with what you watched a while ago. And I forgot to say, I do not work for National Geographic Learning. I was not part of the project. So I just thought that it would be interesting for you to know that there are textbooks, there are materials that somehow incorporate many of our perceptions of what culture should be like. And you see that if you ever take a look at this material online or physically, you see that it was not built based on ELF, but through this understanding of global culture. Right? So, very briefly, this is what the study aimed at. Um, a group of Portuguese applied linguists and Turkish applied linguists, as you saw as the authors of the article, we attempted to verify to what extent ELF awareness is developed in ELT textbooks used in Portuguese and Turkish secondary education. Of course, we didn't have time, or we were limited to analyzing just two textbooks in each country. One locally produced, but produced by a national publisher, and another published by an international publisher. And we basically looked at references to and use of every native or non-native varieties of English. And this we use Catchro's circles, concentric circles, the inner circle, the outer circle, and the expanding circle. And the same with something similar we used for the references to native and non-native cultures, but also we looked at the presence of the local culture and those international topics not specific to a single culture. More specifically, we looked at references to people, to places, and facts, right? Results, if we can summarize the results in four items, 4 topics, this is what we found. There is, fortunately, and to our liking, there were a lot of texts related to international topics in both Portuguese and Turkish contexts. However, the other general results that we were able to identify were not that positive. There was a clear absence of non-native speaker, native speaker, and non-native speaker, non-native speaker interactions, which we then defined as the real communicative exchanges that our students or language users will encounter outside the classroom. To our surprise, near absence of local Portuguese or Turkish culture in those textbooks. And finally, an overall perception that we had is that there was a lack of true ELF-aware approach in those textbooks. Now, based on the results of this study, we may note that what we made note that teachers cope with materials under an ELF perspective in two ways. These are the two ways that teachers usually have how to cope with materials. Either the has no time to build ELF-aware activities, so the teacher relies on the textbook to incorporate an ELF-aware pedagogy, or the teacher is able to build his or her own ELF-aware materials, which is to adapt the textbook to what he or she believes an ELF pedagogy should look like, or ELF activity should look like. What I wanted to call your attention is that basically, and most of the times, what teachers see or understand as ELF-aware activities are related to listening comprehension activities, which is to bring accents of English other than the American accent, the general American, or the received pronunciation of the British. But what I wanted to say, and again, just food for thought. I'm not going to delve into, each of those concepts. We don't have the time or the space for that. So I'm just going to throw some ideas for you to think of, which is the ELF-aware activities that we may incorporate in our classes. And I identify at least some of them. Reading. We can have texts produced by native speakers as well as non-native speakers in our classes, right? It's not just going to, or searching American or British references for texts, but the availability of texts produced by other native speakers as well as non-native speakers is enormous. And another thing that I wanted to call your attention to is the interactive activities in the classroom, be it oral interaction or written interaction. We can have our learners engage with not only native speakers, but also non-native speakers of English, right? There are lots of online tools that we can use for that. I just want to, based on the idea that we can have our students engage with other non-native speakers, one of the features that we usually identify in this interaction among non-native speakers is that there is a lot of mixing varieties. Even though we say mixing varieties, we're looking at two varieties only. We're looking at American English and British English, whether it is in oral text or written text. So my question is, do you think that it has become an ELF feature to mix varieties, and to be more specific, to mix vocabulary, to mix American and British words, to mix pronunciation of some American pronunciation, British pronunciation, or mixing spelling, or somehow to a lesser extent syntax, to use different rules of grammar in the same text. Now, before without trying to end the discussion here, I wanted to call attention to the opposite of mixing varieties, which is the consistency in one variety, to consistently use American English or to consistently use British English, just to mention the two most influential varieties that we have at our disposal, that they are available nowadays in ELT. And my question is it possible for a non-native speaker to be consistent? To my knowledge, to my perception, it is not. Our non-native speakers will mix these two varieties, whether orally or written, because they they are influenced by these two varieties. This was a little bit clear in our study. I don't know if you remember. One of the findings that we were able to identify is that both Portuguese textbooks, the locally produced and published and the internationally published, there was some mixing varieties, whether in the same text, sometimes on the same page, and even in the same unit, mixing American and British spelling and mixing vocabulary, American and British vocabulary interchangeably. So I just wanted to mention this idea of mixing varieties as an ELF feature. Now, another aspect that I wanted to consider and that I wanted you to think about for some time is the distinction between the productive and receptive skills in ELF, or in a larger sense in ELT. So when we want our students to produce language, or as opposed to when we want our students to receive language, because this distinction for me is crucial when we want to identify possible ELF activities in the classroom. Now, for productive activities, we should not forget, we cannot disregard the importance or the relevance of standard English in our classes. We are communicating. I am using English, and you are engaging in listening to my talk and eventually discussing with me, because we have achieved some knowledge and competence in using standard English. So the standard English is the centripetal force. It's the force that unites the diversity and allows us to be able to communicate. And of course, I'm not disregarding the variety. I'm not disregarding the diversity in the language, which is the centrifugal forces, the forces outside, the forces that move away from the center. So this is part of learning any language. We learn, we acquire the standard variety of the language, but we are aware and we become familiar with the diversity of the language. This is not to say that it's the same thing as idealizing the native speaker, because this is for me the trap in ELT. This is when I believe that an ELF awareness is going to help us as language educators, as well as our learners, to move away from this native speaker model as an ideal speaker, an ideal model to be targeted. Right? So what I'm trying to say here is that ELF and EFL are not mutually exclusive. I think they go hand in hand. ELF is part of EFL, as much as I do not believe in an EFL that does not incorporate ELF. So, and continuing with this idea of what we should consider when we think about our classes and when we think about our learners, is what are the stakeholders' expectations? Because I don't believe in changes, in real changes happening, if they don't consider a wider perspective, which involves all those agents of change. I mean, you can now and then change some attitudes, you change some perspectives in your students, in your colleagues, but I think the major changes, true changes, can only happen if all these stakeholders are somehow involved or engaged in those changes. And we're looking at the students' attitudes towards English learning, English use, teachers or teacher trainers, parents, and these two, I think they are very sometimes they are very much related, because all of them have that idea that I believe we should, challenge, which is, good English and bad English. This is what you might have some reactions from your from your students or colleagues when you start talking about ELF, as much as we have here in Portugal or any other European country, which is the idea that ELF accepts bad English, right? So this is something that has to be worked with those stakeholders, as much as another layer of stakeholders, which are the policy makers, the materials developers, and the school management of the context we are part of. So these is, I think we can never forget that we're not alone in our ELF crusade, if you want to call it. All of those agents of change should somehow be involved, as I highlighted there, because that's the idea of, most of them still have that conservative idea of, good English, of standard English, even though they don't know or they are not aware of recent changes in the perception of what English is and what standard English is. For us, non-native speakers in the expanding circle, standard English for us is American English and British English. I'm sorry if I'm somehow, providing some certainty because of my lack of awareness of what happens there in Brazil. Maybe I'm reflecting more my context here, my European context. This is the reality. I'm very much aware, and I remember that when I was in Brazil, of the importance of American English and American culture to Brazil, and not only Brazil, the whole Latin American. But I don't think you guys are much, away from the international trend of the influences of both American English and British English, what Marco Modiano calls the mid-Atlantic English, the English with features of both varieties, and I'm not even considering the possibility of influences from other native standard English, right? Now, almost there. I just wanted to finish with this calling your attention to the importance to my understanding of ELF, which is considering the relevant issues of your local context. The way I see it, there is no single ELF approach to ELT. I think it is important to identify the local needs and features of learning and teaching. I think ELF has as many faces as there are different contexts of language learning and use. So I think each one of them should develop its own ELF construct. Of course, that doesn't mean that it doesn't imply that these contexts cannot engage in dialogue. This is what we're trying to do here. I think at the same time that ELF in Brazil is different from ELF in Portugal, there are lots of similarity. There are lots of points of contact among our contexts. That's why we have constantly engaged in dialogue among ourselves. But I believe the one thing that we can never forget, and I think you guys also have an excellent grasp of that idea, which is the relevance of ELF studies, an ELF perspective in decentering ELT. It's no more privilege of one or two varieties, not just native speaker voices. I think Clarissa has been doing it. She and many others, she did a wonderful job, in your last session when she emphasized the decolonial studies in ELT, and I remember, the reference to the South and North. I think we can apply the south and north to ELF, but the borders are different. I, I, I I have no doubt that Portugal and many other countries in Europe or in Asia, or just to consider what the north would be for the decolonial studies, Portugal is in the south of the north. So there are many more. We have much more in common with the South, the usual South of the decolonial studies, than the North itself. So the borders of North and South, of native and non-native in ELF, is crucial to understanding ELF. Looking at ELF has made it possible to empower the non-native speaker from the expanding circle. So let's carry on with this demanding but rewarding task. We have a lot ahead of us, and let's join together. And so we will definitely get to better grounds in terms of language learning and using. That's it, Savio.
Oh, great. Thanks. So can let's go back to you.
Yep. Let me try. Going back to me. How do I do that?
Yep.
Yeah, but we're back to the YouTube. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh. How do I go out from here?
Did you stop sharing your screen, Luis?
Yeah, just stop sharing, Luis.
I
and
did.
Then we'll go.
Yeah, now.
Okay, yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Luis, for the.
All right.
I think you summarized, you beautifully summarized the text. I believe it probably must have been hard to have 6 people together to work on the study and then write a text like this at 12 hands, right? Six
Yeah.
authors. So,
It was challenging, but yeah.
Yeah, and of course there are lots of similarities, as you said, because Brazil, in Turkey, in Portugal, they are, they belong to the globe, what do we call the global South. So as I said, I think Portugal, and I would include Turkey and Greece also. So they are the south of the north, and for us they are the north of the south. So then, and of course, this whole idea of decolonizing, as we saw with Clarissa, the decolonization of these practices, I think ELF opens up a great avenue for us to, to bring up these discussions, and of course through materials. I think the beautiful job you did analyzing these materials, and I'm sure that there weren't many surprises, as you mentioned. So, and of course, what is enlightening is what comes from your study, from your analysis, and what, as you said, so what we can bring in terms of results to all the stakeholders that you mentioned, not only teachers, teacher educators, all the agents involved, parents, coordinators, writers, etc. Because we know that the industry is very powerful, right? So I had many questions or many things to talk about, but I think I'm going to make, as I know your work, and I know that you do a great job putting these things together. So then I'm going to open up for the people in the group who might have questions and comments. And we also have already some considerations and questions from the audience on the channel. I could identify a lot of our friends there. Lili is there, Ricardo is there, and also a lot of our friends from Brazil. So then I think we have 1 hour for us to discuss, either in English or in Portuguese, So not only based on the text, but also on other issues related to ELF teaching, the ELF approach, and also especially what comes out of all these discussions, these studies, I mean, the results and the developments of this great work. Okay, so then, Luciele, I'll pass it on to you for you
Yeah.
to tell us who are the people who would be interested in asking Luis questions, please.
Yes, the first one is Juliana, who is speaking from London. She's here with us today, and she would like to pose a question. So, Juliana, are you there? Can you please ask him your question?
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Luis, for your presentation. And that was really cool and challenging because when we look at different perspectives of the definition of ELF, makes us wonder where we stand, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And I have a question that is specifically about this conceptual issue. I experienced a moment where I actually had to ask myself, what do I believe in? And it was when I was here doing my exam for the upgrade. You know, when you're doing the PhD, you have the exam in the middle. In Brazil, it's called qualificação. And here's the upgrade. And we spent like 20-30 minutes of my upgrade talking about ELF. Like, basically, I kind of had to defend the field in a way. It was weird, but it was fun at the same time. But I wanted to hear your opinion and maybe Savio's as well and other people about a question they asked me. Because it was me and two other non-native speakers, people who also had English as a second language, the other examiners, right? Both of them were not native speakers. They asked me, in this context here right now, would you say that we are speaking ELF? Or would you say that we are speaking English as a standard language or standard English? Because the setting demanded, and in a way we conform to it, and we tend to speak standard English, right? So yeah, so they were wondering, what are we speaking, and are we ELF users right now when we are using primarily and maybe even strictly standard English? So what would you say?
Yeah, Juliana, thank you so much for your question. I think this question is, I mean, it's directly related to some of the things that I myself have dealt with, and some of the things that I also try to put in this presentation. First of all, defending ELF is something that we will be doing for a long time.
Yeah.
This is what I've done, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I believe I will be doing in many, many more years. We are still in that moment of explaining what ELF is like for us individually, because as you noticed and as you mentioned, and as I try to make clear in the beginning of the presentation, there are many definitions of ELF. And when I chose those two definitions, one by House and one by Jenkins, I did that on purpose because they were different in exactly the sense that, is the native speaker part of an ELF construct, of an ELF interaction, or not? So that's why I think that if we aim at defining ELF based on what we believe ELF is, those three questions are crucial: who, when, and how. Now, trying to answer your question directly is that we have to we have to be very careful when including the native speaker in ELF. If you remember the early studies in ELF, they suggested that the native speaker would have to incorporate some changes, would have to adapt his language to communicating with non-native speaker. So plainly put, if the native speaker is engaged in an interaction with other non-native speakers, and he or she is aware that his standard language or his native language may not be conducive of communication, and that he or she has to adapt and avoid idiomatic expressions and avoid regional accent, all that list that we are that we know of, what makes a native speaker different from a non-native speaker. So if the native speaker is aware of that and accommodates his language to the context of ELF interaction, then I believe he is an ELF participant. If he does not do that, if he just uses the language as he would in his context, with his friends, with his family, with other native speakers, he is not engaging in an ELF interaction. So that's why I understand House's definition, in which she removes the non-native speaker from the ELF interaction. But
the
I also
the native, you mean the native?
The native speaker. I'm sorry, the native speaker. But I also understand Jenkins or more recent definitions, which I don't want to sound too risky here, but they are more politically correct definitions in order to accommodate, in order to allow every speaker to be in the same boat. But we are not in the same boat. The native speaker will never be in the same boat as the non-native speaker. So from my perspective, the true, and I hope you understand my adjective true, my true ELF interaction is among non-native speakers. If the native speaker is part of it, he's going to behave according to the rules of an ELF interaction. I don't know if you agree with me or something.
The layer of complication that they pose to me, and I thought it was quite challenging, is that we were pretty much primarily using standard English, even though we were all non-native speakers. So they were asking, like, if you are not producing something that can be identified easily as non-standard English, would you say that you are right now speaking ELF? Are you using ELF or speaking ELF, however you want to say it?
Yeah.
And I found it challenging, and I explained in terms of like attitudes and it is a matter of attitude to me. That's how I answered. And I also said that it's pretty much impossible for me to stick to a standard like all the time. Especially me, because my English is all mixed in so many ways.
Exactly.
But I wanted to hear your opinion, considering this layer of using standard English while you are a non-native speaker.
Yeah, Julie, if you allow me, I think this whole idea happens to a lot of people. And what the thing is I think Luis mentioned in his talk, many people associate ELF with wrong English or poor English, whatever that is, right? And then you might speak wonderful standard English, but anyway, you still have the label of being a non-native speaker. And then there is still a strong association of ELF or even English as an international language with poor English, mixed English, etc., etc. But then I want to compliment Luis, and then I'll be quiet. Luis, when he says, the native, non-native, this whole discussion is still present, is still very strong. But I think we should advance a little bit this discussion and maybe get closer to what Rajagopalan says when it comes to what he called world English in the singular. That it says, in this construct, the native speaker is irrelevant, and also the figure of the native speaker practically disappears, and there is we should not consider native speakers of this language, because the language belongs to everybody or belongs to no one. So, Luis, my question is, do you believe that we can, I don't know, I'm just provoking, we will reach the level that we are going someday disregard the native speaker when we talk about ELF, the figure of the native speaker? I know when it comes to classroom, to materials, this is still very strong. But in general, do you believe we would be able to reach that level someday?
If my immediate answer, my immediate reaction would be no, Savio. There will always be native speakers as long as there are countries in which English is a native language. English is the first language, so there will be native speakers. As much as there will be non-native speakers. I don't think that there's going to be a decrease or diminish the power or the role of the native speaker. I am more in favor of an enhancement, an increase in the power of the non-native speaker, because the way that we have the power relations is totally unbalanced nowadays. You have the native speaker and you have the non-native speaker. Rather than expecting this to happen, I expect this to happen. I expect the non-native speaker to have a stronger voice in the global context of language use.
But again, if we scholars, ELF scholars start like we ourselves start, I don't know, enforcing this idea, because what happens if we consider English nowadays, we have much more non-native, many more non-native speakers than native. So if we consider in terms of quantity, so English is spoken as a global language. And also, if we take into consideration all the theorization of globality, globalization, and the one aspect that you didn't mention, that even though you talked about mixed varieties, which is translanguaging, which is more and more present in interactions involving English. So I think maybe we can, Luis, dissolve this sort of still very strong power of the native speaker.
Exactly.
Because it's still very strong because we also make it strong.
Exactly.
Yeah, may I say a little something about that? Just for my research, I had people from many different places and origins say whether they were speakers of English for basic, intermediate, advanced, or experts. And something that was very interesting that I found is that people who had English as one of their first languages but came from like African contexts, most of the time they call themselves advanced speakers, not experts. But people, I think pretty much everyone who had English as their first language, but they were from here, in terms of their heritage was from here, they call themselves experts.
Yes. So then,
there is even this battle.
Just one last comment. I think this reaction has to begin from us.
Yes.
Because I wouldn't expect this from the so-called native speaker. It has to begin from us.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, this comment was basically to say that there is even a variation of power inside the people who have English as a first language, whether they were colonized by the English people or if they're English, That there is even that, and we can start doing something about it, and that's what I'm trying to do in my thesis now, is not using the term native, non-native. I'm using like expert, is English, is speaker of English, basic, this kind of thing.
Good.
Talking about the competence. Yeah.
Good.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna go.
Thank you, Julie. So let's have
Juliana.
more people, and then I'll be quiet. Louise is the star.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the next one to Juliana. Participating here. Juliana, are you on?
Okay, I'm here. Hi, everyone.
Juliana, so show show you. Oh, now we can see you.
Yes.
So now,
You
Luis,
see me?
can see you in
Hello. Okay, to start, I just can't help reinforcing our thanks to Professor Luis for being here with us, enriching our morning with such an insightful discussion. And also, I'd like to thank Professor Sabio for making this meeting possible. I must say that this very specific meeting reminded me a lot of the special issue I had the pleasure to edit together with Professor Luis and Professor Savio for A Cor das Letras journal in 2017. The special issue I'm talking about brings together very interesting articles from both national and international scholars, like Natasha Santilla from Greece, Lucilla Loprioli from Italy, Lili Cavaliero from Portugal. And I cannot forget to mention that there is also an article written by Jaciara dos Santos, a member from our Youth Brazil group. The theme of this special issue was language teaching materials under a critical perspective. So most of the articles revolve precisely around what we are discussing right now. So for those interested in having a look at this volume, I can post the link on YouTube channel later. Okay.
Yes,
So
please.
now, other than a question, I'd like to make a comment. First, I have to say I'm a teacher educator, and I also work in a state professional education school. The course book I use in the school teaching context is locally produced, and it is more small culture oriented, which means it tries to determine the particular characteristics of different social groups to successful and harmonious intercultural interactions. It is possible to find many texts and discussions related to the students' own country and culture, and the context presented do not seem to be stereotypical at all. However, when it comes to linguistic features, it still prioritizes and emphasizes native varieties, predominantly American English, which are presented in a linear and hierarchical logical. So you have said, Professor Luis, in your text, and you also reinforced it here in your presentation, that teachers must be sensible and sensitive enough to adapt and enrich the materials at their disposal. So I would just like to add, based on what Professor Sifax has pointed on his meeting in this group, that the use of meta-linguistic and meta-cognitive questions seems to be really helpful to create healthy learning environments in which non-native speakers can feel comfortable enough to expose their ideas, negotiating meaning, being creative, and being aware of the multilingual and multicultural nature of English language used today. So do you have anything to say about that?
Can't agree more, Poliana. And first of all, thanks for you to be here. It's a pleasure to see you again. We usually have some, brief contacts over the internet, Facebook.
Yes.
But it's a pleasure to see you here, and I'm looking forward to working with you again in the future. I cannot, stress more what you said. What you said about your textbook does not surprise me because of the relevance or the importance of the American language and culture to your context. I just have one question. How flexible are you? I mean, not just you or teachers in your context to move away from your textbook and include, supplementary activities? Are you limited to a strict syllabus, or there's some flexibility there?
Particularly in my case, it's pretty flexible. So I can provide my all syllables, yes, and I have also some documents, some official documents here in Brazil that also discuss ELF perspective. So for me, I think it's something that I can, it's very flexible. I can talk about ELF in my own way.
Oh, so you're lucky. You're lucky. So
Yes,
you're one of the lucky ones. Yeah, because as you know, there are some teachers who are very limited, and they say, but what can I do if I don't have time to do anything that goes beyond the textbook? So I'm sure you're going to do a wonderful job with the as you mentioned, the meta-linguistic and metacognitive activities. But don't forget to. There's something that I learned, Poliana, and not and everybody there, by moving away from Brazil, almost 40 years ago. My gray hair and gray beard are true about my age. So one thing that I learned is that by moving away and by experiencing other international contexts, of course, the language is much more than just American English. I don't want to say that it's not relevant. It is relevant for Brazilians to have an awareness of American English, but English is not just American English, and we know that, right? So if you could enhance that idea that there's life beyond the United States, then I think you're really, enlarging and widening the perspective of your learners towards a true ELF and global world Englishes understanding, right?
yes, you're right, Professor. Many thanks for your considerations.
Thank you, Poliana.
Okay, then the next one is the question of Kelly. Kelly is here with us, but she actually can't speak right now. And then she asked me to tell you one question that she was considering during your talk, which is how can we break up with this native lover without breaking the student's deluded heart?
Yeah. Oh my gosh! I wish I had an answer for that.
That's a difficult question. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, but I think it all has to do just to use references to what I tried to provide a while ago. If we look back at the 3-dimension model of intercultural communicative competence by Byron and Morgan, culture is not just about knowing what is Thanksgiving or how high the Statue of Liberty is, or or whatever Hollywood stars or anything. So it's attitudes and it's behavior. So this is how I think we can get to our students and break whatever is limiting them to go beyond the native speaker, the American English, the good English. I remember one of the very first conferences that I attended many years ago. I keep doing that. It sounds as if I want to reinforce how old I am, but one of the very first conferences that I went to was by Widowson, and he said that at that time, ELF is a matter of attitude. And even though a lot has been going on in terms of ELF studies, it is still basically a matter of attitude. It's how you're going to look at all the ingredients, right? And then later on, we can identify, the cultural, the linguistic, the power relations, the native speaker. It all has to do with the beginning is, am I willing to change the way that I behave towards that object? And I think this is where we should start, with changing attitudes and changing behavior. And each one will find his or her own answer for that, his or her own way of breaking that mode in your students, in your classroom.
Luis, before Lou proceeds, So can you tell us a little bit the reality in Portugal when it comes to the teacher education or teacher training? When your experience, and I know that you have with Lili and some of our colleagues, when you when you talk about ELF in the pre-service or in-service programs, what is the reaction? Because of course here in Brazil, it's something still very, I would say, very green. And off and on, I hear things like bad ELF. This whole story of ELF is basically bad English, or even at the at university level, we have a lot of resistance. So if you could tell us a little bit about your experience with the regular teacher, with practitioners, when in Portugal, so then we have an overview.
Yeah. In order to be, true to what I'm going to say, I have to make it clear that I can only refer to those contexts that I'm involved in, that we are involved in, because I know that there are some teacher education courses, pre-service, in-service, in which the professors involved, the agents involved, they're not ELF aware, right? So I can basically say that
But they're not ELF against, are they?
ELF awareness is not pervasive in Portugal, right?
Okay.
So we are beginning to enlarge the scope of ELF awareness in Portugal. Of course, it all started with our, Lisbon, Évora, and Leiria to a certain extent, and our context with other, and as you know, Nova, University Nova in Lisboa is quite of, they somehow they do not accept the ELF construct, but they are open to English as an international language and global English. So I would say that the overall attitude is to accept the international scope of English. The overall attitude is to incorporate this idea in the teacher training programs, in service and pre-service. But I wouldn't say that they are using the ELF construct, right?
Okay.
It's a challenge, and I can just to briefly, try and end this part of the discussion. We have, and Pollyanna is here to back me up. We have just finished a continuous professional development course under the Enrich project. I just want to clarify that, Savi, because this study, this article that I presented, was conducted under the EUTERG project.
Yes.
And the one that you mentioned with Nikos is not
sorry,
EUTERG.
yes.
Enrich. Yeah, no problem. It's confusing. It's a lot of acronyms. So this project that is going on with Greece, with Italy, with Norway, with Turkey and Portugal, we have just finished a CPD course, and I can only talk about our Portuguese participants. It was a very rewarding group. They've all completed the course. I mean, all out of the 30 registered initially, 20, 23, 24 finished. But as usual, some people could not, mostly because of the pandemic and everything. So we have been following their responses, their participation with online activities, with online meetings, with face-to-face meetings. And I can say that we now have 23 teachers in Portugal, primary and secondary school teachers. And let me tell you, 23 teachers in a group like this in Portugal may be the same as 230 teachers for you guys in Bahia, or 2,300 or something like this in Brazil. You have to consider Portugal as a small state in Brazil. So 23 people who are really committed to approaching their classes through an ELF perspective. And we are planning, Lili, Ricardo, and I, if they're still here, they can also back me up. We're planning to continue working with them and try and and make ELF a nationwide project.
Right.
But back to what you said, I would just summarize like this. I think they are very open. Basically, I think primary and secondary school teachers in Portugal, and my students as well at the university, as much as Lili's and Ricardo's, they are very open to this idea. They are very, it might sound really, but they're very much, away from that conservative idea of native speaker, despite the proximity with the British culture, right? And the influence of the British in Portugal.
Thank you.
Okay. Then, if we don't have any other questions from here, from the group, we can
let's
the
go
questions, from YouTube. Luis, I would like to thank you too, anyway, for your talk. It's been like very nice. And I would like also to thank everybody who is here with us. So I would say like Silvânia Capua, who is from UF, is Feira de Santana, Gianna Antunes, Julia Landau, who did not make to be with us here in the research group, Lili Cavalheiro, Roberta Peixoto, who is also from the research group, but she couldn't be here with us in the meeting, and she's following us in YouTube. Ricardo Pereira, Silvana, who is also from UFBA, Raimune, Diogo Oliveira, Luciana Audi, so many people that, have talked to us from YouTube. And there's one very interesting question from Diogo Oliveira that she posed in our channel here. And he says, the first question, actually, he made some questions, but the first one is, I'm not sure if I got the idea of culture. Is it something that pre-exists, the interaction? People have nationality, gender, etc., or is it something that is discursively constructed and resisted? It seems to me that in ICC, people already have culture before they interact with one another. If that's true, then we might be linking language and culture to one or more specific countries' territories. What are the consequences of this link when it comes to defining culture in English as a lingua franca?
Well, this is another hot topic.
Good question. Yes,
exactly.
That's a very good question.
Culture. Yeah. What is culture, and how do we approach culture in ELT and consequently in ELF? The one way to simplify, and I'm not simplifying the discussion, but I'm simplifying the approach, is to look at how culture is portrayed in ELT nowadays and understanding this, what culture means for ELT today, and then from then on try to adapt, try to change the idea of culture. I wanted to show that right now culture in ELT is basically knowing facts about national cultures. So nationalities come firsthand. I'm not saying that I agree with it or we agree with it. We should or should not agree with it. This is what we have. If we open a textbook, most likely, and of course I'm overgeneralizing, most likely you will see references to countries, references to places, references to some people who are nationals of different cultures or different countries. Now, because Diogo points out to something which is an updated approach to understanding culture as something that is constructed from the individual reality, from the individual features, and not just nationalities. Because, I may be a true example of what nationality means to me, right? So if I look at my birth certificate, I have Brazil stamped on it, right? But I cannot limit myself to the Brazilian culture. Most likely because I've spent most of my life outside Brazil. But I can, at the same time, I cannot disregard the presence of the Brazilian culture. Of course, culture is much more than the nationalities, much more than the country where you come from or the country where you live in. Now, what ICC tries to provide is still not enough because, as Diogo said, ICC comes from the idea of a pre-existing culture. Still not naming it because, as I said, ICC is for any foreign language learning. It's not for English language learning. It's not for ELF learning. It more importantly, it can be applied to any foreign language learning situation, which means the role of culture in Italian as a foreign language and Chinese as a foreign language. So of course there will be gaps. Of course, ICC is not the answer to how we should or how we want to approach culture in an ELF perspective. So what I'm trying to say here is that we have not come up to a moment that this is the answer. This is how we are going to approach culture in ELT. So our analysis of materials may point out to this is what happens. This is not what we should be doing. And as Diogo put, it's the awareness that culture is not being dealt with correctly, not correct in the sense of, this is the one, but at least the best way possible in an ELF perspective is that we should identify what culture means in our context. So again, more and more, Portugal has become a multilingual and multicultural country, and focusing on the educational context, mostly in the major cities of Algarve or Lisbon or Porto. The north classrooms have become multicultural and multilingual, not just from the Portuguese-speaking countries, Angola, Mozambique, Cape Verde, Guinea, Timor, but also due to the increasing number of immigrants and refugees, asylum seekers that have come to Portugal. So this reality, if you go to a primary school or a secondary school in Lisbon, in the center of Lisbon, and you enter the classroom, you will find lots of different nationalities. Now, and this is how, in that context, this is how I'm going to identify how you are going to deal with culture, which is different from, I don't know, maybe help me here, the countryside of Mato Grosso, in which the reality of the classroom in a public school, in the, I don't know, countryside of Amazonas or Mato Grosso or whatever, even countryside of Panama, is totally different. So we should not expect to find a recipe of how to deal with culture that can be applied in my Lisbon classroom at the same time in the countryside of Mato Grosso. So although because there are differences, the way that you deal with culture is going to be different. And acknowledging the different cultures of the classroom, because you may have a homogeneous, or at least looking like a homogeneous group, but they're not homogeneous at all because they come from different backgrounds. They have different perceptions of their lives or their learning or their being students and learners. So the teacher has to work with that.
Yes, Savio, your mic is off.
The common definitions and concepts of culture have always been grounded on stereotypes, harmonization, and we know even within a family, people are different. So then, but I really liked Diogo's point, because when it comes to a language, not only English but other languages that have traveled. So the key question when it comes to culture is which culture to teach, right?
Mhm.
So of course,
But
yes.
Savio, let me adjust this. But this question that you just asked right now, I think it's more relevant. It's more salient in English language teaching,
Right.
and English as a lingua franca.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
if you find somebody, I want to learn Italian.
Yeah,
Why?
yeah.
Because probably he or she wants to go to Italy, wants to move to Italy, wants to
Absolutely,
migrate, or
absolutely.
wants
Yeah.
to visit Italy, and wants to know about Rome, and wants to know about the
Yes.
monuments, and
Yes,
wants to know.
yes.
So there is a very clear-cut boundary of what culture means to
Yes.
that learner of Italian, right?
Yeah,
So
no,
things
you're
are
you're
much more
absolutely,
complex when it comes to English.
yeah, you're absolutely right. And
Mhm.
this happens to Spanish. For example, people still,
It-
even though we have our neighbors, we have different Spanishes here in close to us. People always associate Spanish, or most of the time associate Spanish with Spain. And of course, this has to do with the concept of the nation state, the owner of the language,
Yeah.
right? And we shall deconstruct this. So
Yeah.
of course, this is
This
very,
has to do with international language. It happens to Portuguese as well.
yeah,
It happens
yeah,
to Portuguese as well. I mean, what culture we're talking about in Portuguese as a foreign language? Of course,
yeah,
if you're teaching Portuguese as a foreign language in Brazil, you're going to tackle Brazilian culture, because this is the culture that your learner is surrounded by.
yeah.
But
But it is still
outside,
Brazilian cultures, right? In the plural.
yeah, plural, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Next, Lou, we have
Okay.
less
We
than
still have
15
like some minutes, 15 minutes around this. Okay,
Mhm.
the next question we have is from Raimundo Daltro, and he asked this. Considering the beliefs that exist only, that there are only two patterns for the most part of learners, American or British, how can we convince the students that there's not only these patterns, there isn't a pattern only?
Yeah, how can I put it? There is and there is not at the same time. I let me try and make it clear. The teaching of the language is going to be based on these two patterns, because that's the standard form that you are going to find in 95% of a textbook. So the language provided, what we teach our students, this language we're using is based on the standard American English / British English. So there's no way of escaping that. Now, the convincing part is to be done indirectly, because if you spend the whole course just providing instances of American English and British English, of course, the student will leave the classroom believing that there's only American English and British English. So you don't convince, you show your learner that there are other Englishes.
Yes.
Rather than
Yes.
American English, British, when you bring it to the classroom,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Nice. Good point, Luis. Really good point. Danielle said he would have a question. Danielle, just go
Yes.
on. Make your question,
Yeah.
please.
Hello, Luis. Hi again.
Hello, Danielle.
It's a huge honor to have you here with us.
My pleasure.
I have a final question, very practical question. Just to share a story first. A few years ago, I worked in a Brazilian government ELT project, and the course book of that project were actually, in a sense, very ELF oriented. I mean, the listening activities showed many non-native English speakers. However, the Brazilian speakers in those activities were always in lower social status. I mean, they were always the secretaries, the cleaners, the waiters and waitresses, salespeople. So it was very curious. And we at NUPEL, we have this long-term goal of eventually, NUPEL is UFBA's languages courses, right? And NUPEL, we have this long-term goal of eventually producing our own ELT material in line with ELF, with critical pedagogy, with interculturality, etc. But it is so difficult. I mean, all these details, how many non-native speakers should we put in the book listening activity? Where should these speakers come from? How many of them should be Brazilians? Or
what's the proportionality, right?
What about writing activities?
Yes, yes.
Should we review that? Correction. So I'm not asking you to answer all these questions. I just like
Thank you.
You're welcome. I just like to have you any kind of advice for someone who is considering producing an ELF-aware material. Just general advice.
Yeah, that is a challenge, Danielle. That is a challenge. I mean, I congratulate you on the project. I think it's something that every ELF practitioner would like to do, right? To come up with these materials, these activities. But the starting point should be, it's not going to be the answer to all your problems. It's going to point out some alternatives, but it's never going to be the one answer to all the complexities of English language teaching under an ELF perspective. So I think this is one thing that you should always have in mind. It's not going to be perfect. Now, it would be a nationwide, because Savio has mentioned a while ago when I said Brazilian culture. There's no Brazilian culture. There are Brazilian cultures.
No. Yes.
Nationwide or local? I don't, because this is the problem.
Local.
Yeah.
A local book, yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it would be an easier task for me to consider Portugal as a unit, which is something that would be a real challenge for you guys. Now, if it's local, it's much easier. But, the only thing I can say is that considering what we had in mind for a Portuguese similar outcome as that, I think basically you need to know who your clients are and what English means to them. What English is a tool for them. For what? So your clients will use English digitally. Your clients will use English with tourists. And then you can have what tourists are these? Now, I know that, if we look at, if we try and make something ELF-oriented here in Portugal, but, to train our language users to communicate locally using English, I know that I have to consider the amount of tourists that come to Portugal. English, French, German, Americans, Brazilians. So based on that, then it somehow might help me identify the activities or the cultural activities that make more sense to somebody who is going to speak English with the French, with the German, with not the Brazilians, of course, out of question, with the Dutch, right? So I think it's knowledge of the reality of the context, and everything that you think of has to stem from that. And lots of things will be left out because you won't be able to cover everything.
Yeah.
Take time. Series 1, series 2, series 3. It's a long-term project that cannot.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. We are really aware of it.
And we still, Luis, have a lot of resistance to overcome.
Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other comments and questions?
We do some, actually, I don't know if it's a question, but it's a comment. In that, some comments that, we can share here. It's Julia Landau said, this comment from the examiners assume that ELF is a language in itself. And then Diogo says, yeah, and I was thinking, do we speak ELF? And then Julia, right, or does ELF happen when we speak and bring certain attitudes, like Juliana said here with us? And then Roberta asked, good question, Diogo, do we speak ELF when we are in our classrooms in Brazil, talking to our students? And then that's what we would like to, discuss here. Do we talk ELF or do you speak ELF when we are in our classrooms here in Brazil, talking to our students?
I'm going to be very, honest and blunt. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Not everything is ELF. Not everything is ELF. We have to go back to possible definitions. An ELF context, a context where English is used as a lingua franca, is among speakers of different lingua culture backgrounds. So if you put people with the same lingua culture background, it's not ELF, because they all share the same features of English. So plainly put, you're using Brazilian English. As a performative variety, not a variety as in the inner circle or outer circle, but you're using you basically share most likely share the features of that English among the speakers who share the same first language and the same cultural background. Because you cannot consider this as an ELF context, because it goes against the definitions that a lingua franca, forget about English, lingua francas are created when speakers of different languages, different first languages, need to communicate, and so the languages they speak are mixed. And then of course we have to consider the power relations. The lingua franca started, and the lingua franca is the language of the ones in power, of the Latins, of the Arabs, of the Portuguese colonizers, of the British colonizers, over the language of the local groups. So English became the lingua franca because one speaker had English, but other speakers did not have English. So
Luis, I have a provoking question.
Go ahead. I like provoking questions.
As a sociolinguistic perspective, what about, okay, of course you didn't use the term interlanguage, because a lot of people say, oh, you're just speaking interlanguage, which is another story.
I don't use that word because
I don't like it. I don't like it either.
It comes from an idea of.
Of course, you didn't.
Target native, yes.
Yeah, and then of course, you use Brazilian English, but I would say also Brazilianized English. But then my provoking question is, what happens when we have speakers from different varieties of the same origin? For example, a Brazilian talking to a Portuguese.
You touched.
Yeah. Great point.
So tell me, is this ELF or not? So Lili and I talking, is this ELF or not?
Of course, this has to do with my own personal perspective. But then I'm more inclined to believe that there is some ELF in it. I mean, just going back to my Lisbon classroom, even that classroom without the foreigners of the other non-Portuguese speaking foreigners, the Pakistani, the Bangladesh, the Indians, the Chinese, the whatever. It's very usual in most classrooms here to have nowadays Portuguese, Brazilians, lots of Brazilians, Cape Verdeans, Angolans, Mozambicans, and Timoresians.
And they share some
They share Portuguese, but not the same Portuguese varieties.
exactly.
So they share different varieties. So
And
there
they are
are
multilingual. So
exactly
you can have a monolingual. You can have a lot of people from Africa multilingual.
Exactly, and most of them have their Creole languages as their first languages.
Exactly.
Even though they speak Portuguese, but they speak Cape Verdean Portuguese.
Yes.
And I'm not even considering the totally different cultural background for each one of them. So I am more inclined to accept that an English lesson with those students in which the Portuguese, the Brazilians, the Angolans, the Cape Verdeans, the Mozambicans engage in English, then it's closer to what we may define as English as a lingua franca, as speakers of different lingua culture backgrounds.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, me too.
Good.
Okay, we have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's it. We had many other comments.
Yeah.
But then they were more comments than actually questions. We can finish here.
Yeah, I think I was just going to point out that Leo wrote here that at University of Lisbon, pre-service trainees may have heard of ELF, but our classes in the masters in ELT are centered to break down barriers and misconceptions. Yes, and I've been to some of some presentations in the master's program there, and they do a great job. Once trainees are aware of what it involves, they feel more enlightened and willing to incorporate it into their lessons. Okay. And we also have, let's see very quickly.
Savio, let me just say something here that Diogo has just commented, just to follow up the discussion that we were having just now. He said like this: so, ELF does not happen in our Brazilian schools. Question does not happen in our Brazilian schools. You see, we're still suggesting that we Brazilians share the same culture just because we were born in the same country. That's his question. That's his, comment.
Would you like to comment?
I'm sorry, I missed that. What was that, Savio?
Yes,
it says,
from the discussion that we were having like about speaking ELF or not speaking ELF in our country, Brazil, Diogo has asked, so ELF does not happen in our Brazilian schools? You see, we're still suggesting that we Brazilians share the same culture just because we were born in the same country.
Well, yeah, there's a lot that is shared. There's a lot that is shared. Let's not consider that because you are in Bahia, you have a different culture, a total different culture from somebody in Rio Grande do Sul or somebody from Piauí. There's an overall Brazilian identity. And you all share this Brazilian identity. There are regional differences, there are local differences, there are individual differences. But if you are to discuss the effects of the positive aspects of forró or funk or samba, so it's very likely that this can be a topic of discussion in most schools in Brazil, but not in Argentina, but not in Portugal, but not in Italy, but not in China. So let's not confuse differences with distinct cultural identities. There is a Brazilian cultural identity that you all share, and this is present in any classroom. Now, no classroom is 100% homogeneous, and it's the differences that will enrich the discussion. But what is the borderline of sharing culture and not sharing culture, being viewing itself or him or herself as identifying himself or herself as part of that culture or away from that culture. So there's we are touching upon the national identity, and that there is a national culture, which is different if you have an immigrant. If somehow all of a sudden there is an Ukrainian immigrant that arrives in your English classroom, then whoops, that's something else. That person does not share the cultural background that the others share, right?
Yeah. Well, Luis, actually, I'm telling Diogo here that this is a question that I think we should explore a little bit more, because what happens from a point of, depending on the point of view we affiliate to, of course, people see ELF in different ways. And also, when it comes to the instructional environment, so things tend to be even more complex than the everyday routine with where in multilingual situations, because in our context, at least in our area, everybody is Brazilian, and then we start teaching a foreign language. So then what emerges traditionally for I would say that for ELT, what emerges since the beginning is an interlanguage. I think the concept of ELF comes to deconstruct this, but on the other hand, the ones who resist the concept would say that now everything is ELF, you can speak the way you want, mistakes are tolerated, etc., etc. So then I think this is a good discussion that I think it depends on how you see the different definitions of ELF that we've been having over the years, right?
Yep.
So if you consider, for example, the phases of ELF that we've had and we still have, so you can interpret this in the classroom where everybody shares the same language and more or less to a certain extent the same culture in quotes. So we can define, we can teach under an ELF perspective, but we can label in a different way what emerges out of this practice. I don't know. This is something. I think this is something for the next encounter, because we are done. I mean, we have passed 5 minutes already. So then I'd like to thank you, Luis, immensely for for taking your time and being with this enlightening presentation, this enlightening discussion. So then we got to know a little bit about your work and also a little bit about the context in Portugal. And I'm going to ask everybody who's here to, open the camera so then and Danielle can take a good picture of us. And then I would like to announce that the next meeting will be in 15 days, exactly with Diogo. So then keep these questions for him, because Diogo is working with translanguaging and especially under Bakhtinian, perspective. So then we are going to ask Diogo all these questions. So then it would be great. And then after Diogo, we are going to have Yasemin Bayut. I already have the text by Diogo. He just published this and it has to do with his doctoral research. So then I will send the text to everybody soon. But let's open the cameras, and I really, Luis, would like to thank you. It was great, and I hope we can be together soon.
Me too.
This pandemic is over, and let's see if we have everybody here to get the camera. But it was very nice. It was a great discussion, and
thank
you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you again.
Yara, Cynthia, Gabriela.
Gabriela.
I don't know if she's going to be able to
open it. Is here.
Yeah.
Cynthia. So let's see if there is Kelly. Okay, so these are the ones who came today. Cynthia, can you open your camera? Gabriela. Maybe they're not here. Jaciara. So we, because everybody's hungry here, and then and for Luis, it's almost dinner time. No.
I've already had lunch.
Okay, good. All right, and also thank Danielle. Did you take the picture?
Can I take it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Smile. Picture taken.
Great. Thank you.
Great.
So then, also I'd like to thank the ones who came to the discussion through YouTube, especially our friends from Portugal, Lili, Ricardo, and some others, and everybody who came and added a lot to the discussion. So see you in 15 days. Stay safe, everybody, and take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Bye-bye.
See you
Bye-bye.
next day.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Lou, Danielle, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Lucy Ellen, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Lucy Ellen.
Yes,
hope-
we have to talk.
Yeah, I hope that we can carry on with our plans to, work together, right?
Yes, I want